Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Being Event. Welcome to the B&H event space. I was due for one this week. Today, we're talking about the best Sony lenses for landscape photography, hosted by Sony. And I'd like to welcome my dear friend who never judges me for tripping over my tongue,
Never.
Mahesh. What's going on, man? How are you
I
feeling
am
today?
well. I'm well, thanks, Derek. It's always a pleasure. I'm liking the color behind you there with all this. It's
Just
beautiful.
realized I'm like, man, I miss the days when we had those color coordinated back where when I would match and I've gotten lazy, I've fallen off. Oh, man, it's good to have you on. Always a positive, radiant smile waiting for us when you're on, Mahesh. So
Well, I'm just trying to reflect what I see in front of me here with Derek. Gotta keep
I,
up with
I'm
that.
I'm always I'm a happy guy. Everyone thinks it's faked, but
That's
no,
right.
I love what I do. How could I not like this? I get to learn
Yeah, same
all
here. It
day.
shows, brother.
Yes. Thank you, man. Well, look, today I get to learn from you. Is always a pleasure to learn from you. So I'm gonna disappear into the background and wait for questions from our viewers. Of course, you can drop those into the comment section if you're joining us on YouTube. And if you want to just relax and enjoy and learn a little something, that's okay too. Mahesh, I'll turn it over to you and I'll see you in a bit for the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so let me just get this particular screen out of the way. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for welcoming me to your computers, your homes, wherever you may be. Uh, you probably know me from if you've seen me from other B&H events that I do many types of photography, but landscape photography is sort of near and dear to my heart. That's sort of where I cut my teeth on for photography. That's always been my passion. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about quote unquote the best Sony lenses for this photographer's landscape photography. You know, and I'm going to try to make this as practical as possible. I'm going to try to give you many choices to choose from and give you a rationale, at least, about why I chose what I chose or why I take what I take, depending on the type of trips I'm going on. In fact, you will not see me mention maybe one. Would you just hear me mention one G Master, their top of the line lens? It's because yes, they make amazing G Master, great build quality, great sharpness. But for a lot of the way that I shoot landscapes and a lot of way the masters shot landscapes, it often isn't necessary to have this super equipment that are really expensive. And hopefully, I can sort of share that concept with you and try to convince you a little bit about why that's the way to go. So we'll get started with that preamble. So a couple of disclosures I always like to make. This is a Sony sponsored event, and I'm very grateful for Sony for providing me with this platform, B&H also for being always gracious and hosting me and allowing me to speak my opinions. I am a Sony Alpha ambassador also, have been for many years. I'm proud to say that. And all images that you see here are taken with a Sony system. And these are taken with either a full frame or an APS-C sensor camera. I'm not going to see a lot of images because it's not really about me showing you my images, it's me talking to you about why certain equipment I think is going to be helpful for your landscape photography. This talk has evolved over the years. It started out as why do I shoot f4 lenses for landscape? Because I really believed f4 lenses were the way to go. There was a great compromise between weight and portability and sacrificing virtually no, in fact, no sharpness in the apertures that I typically shoot landscapes at. And it evolved a little. So instead of calling, why I use f4 lenses for landscape photography, it's just what are the best landscape photography lenses? Because there are some lenses that have been developed recently that are f2.8 lenses, but they're super light, still amazing good quality. There's lenses that they've developed that are variable aperture lenses, which are also great now. So I didn't want to bias the talk by saying, okay, only carry f4 lenses. But if you are interested, I published this article way back in 2015, and a lot of the concepts I talk about there still applies to why I carry these uh, non-super fast lenses, the ones that are optically really excellent, but yet lightweight and portable. So if you have a chance, you could just Google, Thapa, my last name, and then f4 Sony lenses, and I think this article should come up pretty quickly in Google. Again, I say f4 lenses, and I want to sort of keep that because it gives you sort of a something to hang your hat on. Realizing that, okay, he's saying f4, meaning that you don't need the f2.8s, you don't need the f1.4s, the 0.95 lenses for this type of photography. And why do I say these smaller lenses? Because it's exactly that. It's smaller, it's lighter, it's often way less expensive, and the quality is just as good as far as sharpness goes, as far as lack of vignetting, uh, and not having distortion or flare, just because the coatings that they're using now, the quality of the glass, the only thing you lose is a little bit of stop of light, particularly for landscape photography when you're on a tripod, when you're shooting at apertures that are not super wide. It really doesn't make sense to carry something that heavy, that well, quote unquote, well built for this type of photography. So the accessories for these lenses are also much smaller and much cheaper. So oftentimes these f2.8, f4.14 aperture lenses are going to be 82 millimeter filters. Maybe the smallest one you're going to find is 77 millimeter filter threads. And those can get quite expensive. Many of the lenses I talk about are going to be 62 millimeters, 67 millimeters, and maybe an occasional 77, but it's going to be reasonable in price. So it's not just the equipment, but the accessories that you use for the equipment are not only going to be cheaper, but they're also going to be lighter. Okay, I do want to start out with uh, again, why I like these variable apertures or f4 lenses. The number one reason is, as a landscape photographer, I really want to capture, in general, more depth of field. I want to make sure everything from that flower in my foreground to that distant mountain or the sky is perfectly tack sharp, right? If I want to do that, I'm going to use usually sort of an ultra wide angle lens or wide angle lens. I'm going to narrowed the aperture down to f5.6, f8, f11, maybe f16, right? And depending on how much I want to capture as far as the depth of field and how much sharpness I'm willing to sacrifice because of diffraction at very, very narrow apertures. But I'm not shooting usually at f1.4, f2.8. Astro is something different. We'll talk about that a little bit. But in general, for these wide open landscapes, I'm shooting at a very more reasonable apertures if you want to think of it that way. And realize that the sweet spot for most lenses are usually 1 to 2 stops narrower than the widest aperture. So if the sweet spot, for example, for an f4 lens is going to be f5.6 or f8, exactly where I want to be. The sweet spot for often the f2.8 lenses is going to be, maybe f4 or f5.6. Maybe that doesn't give you quite the enough depth of field as something that you might going to go f8, f11 on. So people say, all right, you've got these narrow aperture lenses, but I do a lot of astrophotography. Can they really keep up? Pound for pound, no, right? There's nothing you can do. Well, there's some things you can do, but physics is physics. A camera or a lens that's gonna have a smaller sensor for a camera or a wider, narrower aperture is not gonna gather as many photons as a full frame camera or a wide open lens. But that doesn't mean that we can't use these narrow aperture lenses for photography because the sensors are gotten much better. Their high ISO performance is much better. There are techniques that we have now where we can combine multiple high ISO images to come up with a cleaner value. So there are ways. So, and when we're talking about astrophotography, we're not talking about something that's, in the moment, either you capture it or it's gone. You could take your time. You can take multiple exposures. You can sit there and later combine them particularly if you have a workflow, if you have an automated system. So it's not as much of a sacrifice as you might think to do astro. I mean, some people think it's sacrilegious to say, oh, you can use f4 lenses on astro. But here's an example I shot with a 1635 f4 lens on a full frame sensor, and it came out great. This was just one shot for the foreground, one shot for the sky. But if you really want to, like, if your bread and butter photography and landscape is going to be Astro, then consider getting something like that 20mm f1.8. In fact, I have that here somewhere. I have so many lenses I want to show you guys today. Oh, it's actually attached to my camera. So here it is right here. This is the 20mm f1.8, still very, very light, very, very small. And it's a G lens, so it's well built, but it's not G Master lens. So the price is going to be still very, very reasonable. So if you want to add something for your astrophotography and you don't want to spend the money for like a G Master 24mm f4 or a 14mm 1.8 or 35mm 1.4, these are all G Master lenses. They're wonderful. They're awesome. They're heavy. You can really do wonders with this 20mm 1.8 for astro. But if you do it very occasionally, you can get away with just a variable aperture f4 lens like the 1635. So I wanted to compare a little bit about, back then in 2015, what did I usually carry with me and what do I carry now for the most part? So if you look at back then, I carried a 1635 f4 lens. I still do that now, except it's just the updated version. It's the PZ version. It's sharper, it's lighter, it has more automatic zoom capabilities, but in essence, it's very similar optically. I used to carry the 24 to 70 f4. And that was a good lens. Wasn't a great lens because it did suffer a little bit with corner softness. But then Sony replaced it with the 24 to 105 f4, which is just, if I were to carry just one lens on me, and I want to capture a little bit of wide angle, a little bit of telephoto, and everything in between, that would probably be the lens that I take with me, is the 24 to 105. In fact, I want to show you something. Oh, and finally, I for medium telephoto, I used to carry the 7200 f4. I still do that, except it's the updated version, which also includes a macro lens. It's still f4, but it's tack sharp. Flare is much more controlled. I was looking at my system and I thought, oh, this is interesting because my go-to sort of landscape is the Sony A7R5. And if you notice, this is not the way it looks. It has a coating on it. It's got a skin. It's a blue skin. And I have a bunch of lenses, but what I noticed is I have this as a blue skin, and I have the 24 to 105 f4 as a blue skin. I have the 16 to 35 f4 as a blue skin. And what else did I notice? Which I didn't mention here, but what I have this 70 to 300 as blue skin. I guess why am I making a significance of that? That means that at one point I had this equipment that I carried with me all the time. So when I bought the skin, I wanted it to match. So I just got the same thing for all of them. So everything when I took with me, that's what I took with me. I took the A7R5, I took the 1635 f4, I took the 24 to 105 f4, and I took the variable aperture 70 to 300. Of course, now I've sort of replaced that with the 70 to 200 f4, which is this right here. So I do sacrifice 100mm, if you will, in the telephoto range, but that's the beautiful thing about a high sensor camera. You can use the megapixels as a pseudo zoom, right? You can crop the 200 megapixel image, by a little bit, and then you still have like a 40 megapixel image or whatever at the 300mm equivalent, or a 30 megapixel image at a 400mm equivalent. So having a high resolution sensor like the A7R5, or my other camera that I take for very, very lightweight, the A7CR, both 60 megapixel cameras, the high megapixel value allows me to carry, if you will, one less lens if I need to. Okay, if that makes sense. So that's sort of like my go-to hiking backpack. Maybe sometimes even backpacking. But if I'm backpacking for much greater distances, I can't take all this equipment. And we'll sort of go over some scenarios where I have different things that I take depending on what I'm gonna plan to go shoot. So if you want to carry really, really ultralight gear in the full frame sense, so instead of carrying a 16 to 35, 24 to 105, instead of and a one maybe 100 to 400 or to 70 to 200. If you are willing to sacrifice a little bit in the uh, ultra wide range, Sony makes that beautiful 20 to 70 millimeter f4 lens. So another f4 lens, it goes wider than 24, and oftentimes 20 millimeters is great for ultra wide angle photography, right? And then it still goes all the way to 70 millimeters. So if you took a full frame 60 megapixel image shot at 70 millimeters and you cropped it by 50%, you still have a 30 megapixel image, but now the equivalent of 140 millimeters. And remember, when you crop, you also multiply your depth of field by the same amount. So if you shot a 70 millimeter image at, let's say, f4, and then you cropped it by 50%, it becomes an f8 depth of field, which is exactly what I want anyway, because I want more depth of field in my landscape images. So sometimes the crop factor, if you want shallow depth of field, hurts you, but for landscape photography, crop factor or even cropping after the fact actually is a boon for at least my type of landscape photography. And, I'd venture to say a lot of landscape photographers, because they are really going for that increased depth of field. So if you want to go ultra light, 20 to 70, and to that, if you want a little bit of telephoto action, you can add the 70 to 200 f4. These are both f4, super lightweight. The 70 to 200 takes 72 millimeter filters, okay? And our other lenses, but over here, I think I just put it here. What did I do with it? Here we go. This one takes 67. So you could have one set of 72 millimeter filters. Again, remember, they're much smaller and much cheaper than 77 or 82 millimeter filters. Get a step up ring or step down ring, however you want to look at it. And you could take that one set of 72 millimeter filters and also use it on your 20 to 70 ultra wide angle. So if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit in the ultra wide range, between 16 and 20 millimeters, you can get away with just those two lenses. And if you really wanted to do astro, there's no reason why you couldn't just take the 20 millimeter lens, which is nice and tiny. And you've got this great backpacking setup, full frame setup, in something this small and lightweight. So I used to carry the Sony a7R5 all the time, right? That used to be what I used to do. But I just carry now the a7CR, which is this one. Again, bringing it together, it doesn't look that much smaller or bigger, depending which one you're looking at, but the weight is actually quite significant. And uh, the fact that this is slightly less robustly built, but still weather sealed, means that it's overall not as heavy and not as cumbersome to carry around. So for many of my trips, I now have sort of switched over to the A7CR from the A7R5. It's not quite as good, the viewfinder or the panel back there, but I'll sacrifice that for lightweight and portability. Now, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and I'll come back to some scenarios. What about APS-C sensors, APS-C cameras, APS-C system? I think there's a place for that. We talked about how in landscape photography, we want more depth of field. Well, that's already built into the APS-C sensor, right? There's already the 1.5 crop factor, which is applied to both the focal length, to the aperture, light gathering abilities, however you want to think about it. So it has pluses and minuses, but for landscape, there is a significant plus, meaning that if you shoot anything at f4, 1.5 crop factor, it's like a 5.6, right? You already got that built-in increased depth of field, if you will. So for the APS-C sensor, and I do carry that sometimes. I carry that if I'm going for super long backpacking trips, where even that lightweight a full frame system can be a little bit too much. And I basically carry two lenses with me. I carry the 10 to 20 f4 and the 18 to 105. Actually, it's not f4. 18 to 105, but I actually I've switched to the 18 to 135. I used to carry the 18 to 105 1.4, but that even has gotten a little bit heavier than I like, but I've switched over to this 18 to 135 f3.5 to 5.6, and this is super light. This, in conjunction with these two lenses. So this is our 10 to 20 f4G. This is our 18 to 135 f3.5 to 4.5. Amazingly lightweight. These two lenses basically cover everything I want to cover in APS-C, except maybe Astro. If I want to add Astro, I add this 11 millimeter f1.8 lens. So between those three lenses and the small body, which right now I'm using the A6700 as my APS-C go-to camera. If I'm going to do Astro, if I know that I'm going to do that, I'm going to take this 11 millimeter. Otherwise, I just take the 10 to 20 f4 and the 18 to 135, and they make an unbelievably lightweight, great setup. And the autofocus, the low light capabilities because it's a Sony sensor. I mean, you're not really giving it that much in going with the APS-C system. Now, if you wanted a little bit more telephoto, okay, and you were willing to carry a little more, here is probably one of my favorite telephoto lenses in the Sony system, and it's made for the APS-C, and it's a G lens, so it's really well made. It's the 70 to 350, 4.5 to 6.3, and this is it right here. It's a G lens. It's a beautifully made lens, tack sharp. That 350 millimeter equivalent is going to be punching way above that, like 450, something or close to 500 millimeter focal length. So that's pretty impressive. Now you don't have to take that, right? For most trips, I don't really need something that long. I can get away with the 10 to 20 and the 18 to 135. But if you wanted to, you've got that option, the 70 to 350. And if you want to take Astro, I personally like the 11 to 1.8, but there's also a 15 1.4. 15 gives you a little tighter crop. I usually like my Astro to be a wider angle field of view. That's why I ended up going with the 11 1.8. Also a little bit less expensive, I think, than the 15 to 1.4. So that's the APS-C setup. Let's go back a little bit on the full frame. And that's just the last thing I wanted to show you about what some ideal situations were. Let's say you are willing to carry a little bit extra weight because you want to capture the entire gamut from like 16 millimeters to 400 millimeters without having to go through the idea of cropping later, and you want the full 60 millimeter full frame sensor for every image that you have. Well, the best thing I can recommend is you replace the 70 to 200 f4 with this one. This is the 100 to 400, right? This is a G Master lens. This is built like a G Master lens. It's heavy like a G Master lens, but it's amazingly sharp, amazingly well controlled as far as flare. And I love the fact it has this little slider here that goes like this. And why is that cool? Well, when you have your lens hood on, okay, let's say you wanted to adjust your filter. Let's say you had a polarizer and you want to change it. You no longer have to try to reach in here, try to turn it, or take the hood off. You can just slide this back like this, and find your filter and turn it that way. I mean, that's genius. I use that all the time because I almost always have some kind of a polarizer on my lens. So to be able to do that, it's great. It's the little things that Sony has thought up that really ends up making a big difference. So if you wanted to carry a setup like this, I would recommend something just like before, 16 to 35 f4. You could do the 24 to 105 f4 and then add this, the 100 to 400. So, and you have very little overlap between the 105 millimeters and the 100 to 400. Like if you did not want to sacrifice anything and you wanted just every single focal length between 16 millimeters and 400 millimeters, and you wanted that beautiful telephoto effect, that is the combo I would go with. Okay. Now, let's say you want to take one lens and you were willing to give up low light capabilities. You wanted to be super lightweight, yet you wanted some focal length coverage. Well, the kit lens the Sony A7CR comes with is amazing. It's this thing, guy. It's this guy right here. It's the 28 to 60 f4 to 5.6. When I first got this, I'm like, this is probably one of my lenses I'll never use. It's a throwaway lens. But every time I put this on my camera on a 60 megapixel sensor and took images, I was shocked. I was outright shocked at how good this little lens is at capturing sort of everyday life, everyday landscapes. 28 to 60, it's a little bit restrictive, but it gets most of the shots when you're on a hike. Like put this on A7CR. I'm gonna in fact do it right now for you guys, and you'll see how amazingly lightweight and tiny this can be. This is it. Just to give you perspective. So this is a full frame camera with that sort of standard lens, right? Here's our APS-C camera, right? Very similar. Yet you get more range with this. So don't discount that kit lens. If I were to buy this A7CR or A7C2, I would get it with that kit lens just because it's something that I just leave on there if I go out for just a walk with my family or I go for a little hike in the neighborhood. That's the lens I have on. I also have a few other lenses that I want to sort of give honorable mentions to, if you will. Sony recently came out with their full frame G lenses that are 2.8 but are extremely portable and lightweight. They are the ultra wide 16 to 24 or 25, I forget what it was. This is the other one. Let me find the 16. Here it is. Yeah. 16 to 25. Sorry. They came out with the 16 to 25 f2.8 and they came out with the 24 to 50 f2.8G. So these are legitimately f2.8 lenses. Remember I said, well, I wouldn't really carry an f2.8 lens because they're kind of heavy, cumbersome. Well, they basically split up the 16 to 35 and sort of the 24 to 70. You don't quite get 70 with the 50 millimeters, and made two lenses out of it. And they are amazingly lightweight. So if you didn't want to carry an extra lens for, let's say, astrophotography, let's say you would just want a single focal length 16 to 24, this is it. This covers your ultra wide range because it goes from 16 millimeters all the way to 25, and it's an f2.8 lens, so it's plenty good enough for astrophotography. So you could take this and forget about the 20 millimeter f1.8 and leave that behind because you have a little bit of zoom range here and you've got the ultra wide beyond the 20 millimeters also covered. So if you didn't want to worry about anything past the 50 millimeter range and what you really wanted to concentrate was on standard telephoto and ultra wide telephoto, but really not be limited by a smaller aperture lens, and you do want to carry a dedicated astro lens, this two as a combination, I think is a great choice because it covers everything from 60 millimeters to 50 millimeters, and it provides you f2.8. And you know what? The filters, it's only 67 millimeters. So you could get away with cheaper filters, smaller accessories by going that route. What else do I want to mention? I think I mentioned this guy, 35, 1.8, 24. Yes, so I think I've mentioned all the lenses that I frequently use. Some of them are new, so I'm beginning to use them now, depending on what kind of traveling I'm doing, what kind of hiking I'm doing, what the terrain is, what my goal is. Have I been there before so I know exactly what I'm looking, or do I have to take some equipment because I don't know what I'm looking for? All these things should factor into what gear you want to carry with you. Um, Always carry a tripod, use your filters judiciously. make sure you're prepared for the elements. These are also things that you need to consider. And pretty much almost every lens that I talked about here uh, is going to be weather sealed. The cameras are weather sealed, so there you already have all that built in with the Sony system. So I want to leave a little bit of time for you guys to answer some questions for you. Uh, Anything at all related to gear that I've talked about here, something that I haven't mentioned that you were considering. Like, I have a closet full of Sony cameras and lenses. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask.
Yeah, don't let him get away. Ask those questions. We got an accessories question from Vincent. Says he has the 21.8 for Astro, but sometimes wants to go wider. Have you used a nodal slider before, and would you recommend it for panoramas?
That's a great question. And I actually haven't used the nodal slider before. So I'm not a big panorama I'm a guy. So when I do panoramas, it's typically I do it for astrophotography. And then I just take multiple images from my tripod and my ball head. I haven't not used slider. I think I'm embarrassed to say I don't have the patience for that, I think. So it's a great question, but I can't answer that question. Sorry.
It's sticking with accessories. I mean, you've done a couple workshops with us, Mahesh, where you've built out whole accessory lists. Is there something for the people who are looking for landscape and astro? What do you think is the let's cross filters off the list because we already know filters is
Yeah,
like the probably the number one thing. But
yeah.
besides filters, what's something that accessory wise that people generally forget is super necessary for landscape?
Yeah, I'll answer that in terms of astrophotography, and I'll answer that in terms of general landscape photography. So when I run workshops, I tell people one of the things you really don't want to forget is a headlamp. But not just a headlamp, but a headlamp that has a red light or a green light, because white light really affects your night vision, and it really, pisses everybody else off around you. So having that headlamp lets you, and it's headlamp, it's not something you carry in your hand. It lets your hands free to do to work the lenses and the camera. Uh, I think that's probably the single most important accessory for for astrophotography. And I want to add a caveat to that. A lot of great lenses that I didn't mention here are manual focal lenses. And oftentimes these manual focal lenses have a hard stop. And oftentimes you're sort of um, focusing at the infinity point. So you get the stars tack sharp. But a lot of these lenses, even the super expensive ones, where the infinity mark is marked is really not where infinity is. So if you turn it all the way to infinity and you take a picture thinking that it actually focuses quote unquote beyond infinity. So you get these very, very blurry images. So what I say to people is, you know, at home on daytime, focus on something very, very far away, like a mountain on your manual focus, and mark it on your lens where that is with a little marker, and then turn to that thing when you're ready to do astrophotography. It'll not steer you wrong. Another piece of advice, make that marker with a green pen. Okay. If you use like a black pen or some of, you may not be able to see it at night, especially if you have red light on. But if you have green marker on there, I find that's much easier to see. That's a pro tip. So it's not really an accessory, but it's like an accessory. The fact that you have marked that manual focus lens exactly where it needs to be. And as far as sort of a general accessory for landscape photographers, it's a filter wrench. A lot of people will come to workshops and they have these circular filters that you screw in front of your lens. You'd screw it over here. And then what happens? It gets cold, it gets hot, and you have multiple filters on top of each other. They get stuck. It really gets stuck. And you try to turn it. I mean, people's entire trips have been ruined because they've put on like a 10 stop ND filter in front of their lens, to shoot that waterfall in the daytime. And then they left it on, and the nighttime comes and they went to Astro. They're trying to Astro with a 10 stop ND filter on, right? And try as they might, they cannot. I've seen literally people take that lens and tap it on the ground. They've got this $3,000 lens, the tapping at a rock, so they can loosen that, try to loosen
Um,
the filter. A simple filter wrench. B&H sells them. They come at two sizes, small and large, I think. You put it around the lens. I wish I had taken it out. But you pull it around the lens, turn it, it works wonders. So that's another accessory that I always advise people to carry with them.
just take a 48-hour exposure if you're filtering stuff. Come on, live a little, Mahesh. Well, look, that tip, I think the best accessory is a great tip. And that
Yeah.
marking, you like looked into my soul when you were talking about the infinity focus point, and I'm just like, you know how many times I've given up and I'm like, is it me? Is it the lens? Is it like what's going on here? And
It's
I'm just
not
like,
you.
no, and you have to figure out every lens has its,
Yeah, it's a
some lens
different
it's like
point.
you go to the end and you have to do a little twist back.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's like,
And sometimes some lenses you have to come back pretty far.
yeah,
And imagine trying to do test shots when you're in the middle of the night. Each time you're trying to make a little
that
micro turn
makes
with that.
perfect sense. It's like trying to use, like when all the little the manual focus assisting, that they have,
Yeah,
like that every camera has. It's like
yeah,
I've never found one that is super accurate for night, because the stuff that works during the day doesn't really work at night.
yeah,
And sometimes you find yourself where you're like everything looks great on the back, and then you get it in, and you're just like,
yeah.
wow, the edges are minimally soft.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, that was a tip that was given to me years ago. I mean, years ago, and I find that to be just as true today as it was that long ago.
That's gold. I'm taking that one to the bank today. Danny did drop a link there for a filter wrench kit for every size. So if you guys are looking for a filter wrench kit, there is one right there. But Mahesh, you came, you educated us. You threw a little tip in there. Out of everything you said, I'm like, man, that's my favorite part right there. The green pen and everything.
Yeah,
Taking
right.
that one to the bank. So huge thank you to Mahesh, as always, for bringing the good vibes and the information. All you out there. We're gonna let you go a little early today. Class is
Thanks, guys.
out for the week. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Huge thank you to Sony and Mahesh for today's presentation. That is it. Another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books.
Bye,
Until
guys.
next time.